we're going to start off by multiplying complex numbers, also known as imaginary numbers. And usually I is known as the imaginary number. And what you need to know before you start multiplying these numbers is that I squared equals -1 all the time. So whenever you see I squared in any problem, just take that out and plug in -1 instead. And this is going to be our first problem. And what we're going to do for this is multiply I by 3. So that's going to equal 3I. And then I times I, which is going to be I squared. And we know that whenever we have I squared, it's -1. So our next step is going to be 3I plus -1. And that would be your final answer. And moving on to our second problem, it's pretty much the same type of problem, just takes a little more work because it's longer. And for this, we're going to do 2 times -6, which is -12. And then 2 times -2i, which is going to be -4i. And then we do the inner ones, which is going to be 3i times -6, which is -18i. And then 3 times -2i, which is going to be -6i squared, since there's 2 i's. And we're going to bring down the -12, and then we know that since -4 and -18 have the same variable, which is I, we can add or subtract them. So -4i minus -18i is going to equal -22i. So we'll bring that down. And then, as we know, I squared is -1. So this is going to be -6 times -1. Since you're replacing I squared with -1. You don't take the entire -6i squared out and just put -1 in. You only take I squared out whenever you're going to replace it with -1. So you bring down the -12 minus 22i. And -6 times -1 equals +6. And you know you can add these. So -12 plus 6 is going to equal -6 minus 22i. And you can leave that as your final answer. Or if you wanted, you can pull out a 2 because, or pull out a -2 since -2 goes into -6 and -22i. So it could also equal -2. And whenever you pull out a number, you put it outside the parentheses. It's going to be 3 plus 11i. Don't forget the I. So if you do this, -2 times 3 is -6, and -2 times +11i equals -22i. It's just simplifying your answer. Some teachers want it, some teachers don't. So our second problem, our third problem is going to be this, which is also simple. So we're going to start out by multiplying 1 plus 1. 1 times 1, which is going to be 1. And then 1 times negative 2i, which is going to be negative 2i. Then positive 2i times positive 1, which is going to be positive 2i. And then positive 2i times negative 2i, which is going to be negative 4i squared. And we bring down the 1, and we know that this is going to cancel out because positive 2i and negative 2i will equal 0 if you go to add them. So that cancels out, and we just bring down the negative 4i squared. And we know that I squared equals negative 1. So this is going to equal 1 minus 4 negative 4 times negative I, which is going to equal 1 plus 4, since negative 4 times negative I is positive 4, and 1 plus 4 equals 5. So that would be your final answer. And that's how you multiply imaginary numbers.